cash, something extraordinary happened in Congress, the kind of moment that tells you the truth isn't trickling out anymore. It's exploding into the open. Because when a member of Congress looks a committee chair directly in the eye and calls him a useful idiot on national television, you know the storyline people were fed for years is collapsing in real time. And what makes this moment even more unbelievable is that the truth tearing everything apart was hiding in plain sight, buried inside files that were supposed to expose one group of powerful people, but ended up dragging someone completely unexpected into the spotlight. The political world had spent years promising that these documents would detonate the careers of certain public figures. Influencers swore the records were being covered up to protect high-profile allies.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let's go through the history of the Epstein files. During the Biden administration, this was cause celeb number one for the extreme MAGA right, that there was some massive conspiracy to hide Democratic political involvement in Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking ring. It was promoted and perpetuated by Kash Patel and Dan Bongino over and over and over again. It is probably the #1 conspiracy theory on the online MAGA right. And it was pushed and pushed and pushed that they had to release the files, they should release the files. And Donald Trump was asked on the campaign trail, should the Jeffrey Epstein files be released? And he said yes. Donald Trump comes into office, and Pam Bondi releases a small portion of the Epstein files that had primarily already been public. There's an uproar on the right and by many, many members of Congress about why the Epstein files were not being released. Pam Bondi says, she writes a memo or an email saying that she wants an explanation for why there aren't more files that are released within 24 hours and that within 2 weeks she intends to release them. Then the FBI spends tens of thousands of hours going through the files to redact them. Redact, obviously, what you would need to redact, which is the identification information and any other information about the victims. That lasts a couple months. All of a sudden, it goes quiet. It goes quiet. Suddenly, Congresswoman Luna and others who have been pushing so aggressively for the Epstein files to be released decide we're going to stay quiet. And all of a sudden, they're not released. Well, what do we learn next? Oh, we learn, actually, this whole right-wing conspiracy theory is BS. It is bogus, and Donald Trump is in the Epstein files. So now, all of a sudden, the Republicans who were so aggressively intent on releasing the Epstein files because they were going to be a huge, explosive story about Democrats involved with Jeffrey Epstein are quiet. So the irony of these Republicans accusing the Democrats now of only being interested in this is for political purposes is so thick that it is almost sucking us into the quicksand. But let's go a step further. Let's go a step further. Because now the cover-up is getting so deep and so intense that this committee, which has oversight over the Department of Justice and would ordinarily be the one that is doing this investigation, is running away from it. Why? Because Chairman Comer is the useful idiot who will do the cover-up for Donald Trump. And what does that mean? Oh, well, now there is an oversight investigation, but you know what they're not asking for?
Those kind of comments, and he knows that. Gentleman's recognized.
Now, the oversight committee is doing an investigation, but you know what they're not asking for? You know what you did not put in the rule to confirm that investigation? We're not asking for the documents that were used to open the investigation, who provided the information. They're not asking for witness statements, victim witness statements. They're not asking for recordings that may exist. They're not asking for any of the evidence that might include Donald Trump. And rather than acknowledge that you're just trying to cover up for Donald Trump's knowledge and involvement in the Jeffrey Epstein scheme, you're trying to accuse us of being interested. And there's one more point that I will say quickly. This conspiracy theory that you pushed for years is bogus. And when it comes out to the American people that it is bogus, then they will know that all of your other conspiracy theories are also bogus, and your credibility is nil. And I yield back.
Posts, streams, podcasts, and talk shows built entire narratives on the idea that there was a massive secret locked away from the public. They convinced millions that the files were being hidden for one reason, and one reason only, to protect the powerful. It didn't matter that no one had actually seen the documents. It didn't matter that almost every claim online was built on half sentences, out-of-context screenshots, and recycled rumors. All that mattered was that this theory spread, and once it spread, it stuck. And the louder the theory got, the more the pressure grew. People were told that the moment the files went public, everything would change. Political careers would collapse. Cover-ups would crumble. A new truth would rise. That was the promise. Release the files, they said. Release the truth, they insisted. But it turns out the biggest twist wasn't inside the documents at all. It was the silence that followed the moment investigators finally started reviewing them. Because when the new administration took office and the Attorney General stepped in, the pressure hit its peak. Cable news hosts yelled for transparency. Influencers demanded accountability. Lawmakers gave fiery interviews insisting the documents needed to be released immediately. There were countdowns, dramatic speeches, and even talk of subpoenas if the release didn't happen fast enough. The public watched the tension rise as if a bombshell was guaranteed. And then, finally, the Attorney General released a portion of the files. Not everything, a small set of documents that were mostly already public. The online world went wild. Commentators raged. Politicians who had been shouting for transparency for years doubled down and demanded all remaining documents within a single day. Within 2 weeks, they promised the full truth would be exposed. That's when the FBI stepped in. Investigators launched a massive review. Tens of thousands of hours were spent examining every piece of sensitive information. They redacted details that could endanger victims. They identified statements, interviews, and materials that required legal protection. It was a complicated, careful, time-consuming process. But then something strange happened. Something no one expected. Something louder than any conspiracy theory: silence. Complete silence. The same voices that had spent years demanding the files be released suddenly stopped talking about them altogether. No more speeches. No more interviews. No more social media rants. The outrage didn't fade, it vanished instantly. Almost like someone flipped a switch and the entire movement shut down. Not one person who had built their political brand on "release the files" demanded them anymore. Not one. And that's when people inside Congress began to ask the same question everyone watching was thinking. What changed? Why would a group that screamed for transparency suddenly refuse to talk about it? Why did the urgency disappear overnight? What did investigators find during the review that made the loudest voices go silent? And then the congressional testimony began. A few hints here. A few quiet statements there. And suddenly the truth slipped through the cracks. The reason for the sudden silence wasn't confusion or caution. It was panic. Because investigators reviewing the files found something completely different than what the online narrative claimed for years. Certain names appeared in the materials that no one in that political movement ever expected to see. Names that flipped the entire story upside down. Names that transformed the theory into a liability. And that's when the whole movement reversed course. The same people who demanded sunlight were now demanding darkness. The same people who shouted transparency were now insisting on silence. And the same committee that promised to dig into the truth began refusing to ask for the most basic documents needed for a real investigation. That's when Congressman Dan Goldman stepped into the spotlight. And he didn't tiptoe around it. He didn't dance through polite phrases. He didn't bury the truth under political language. Instead, he walked straight up to the microphone and detonated the entire storyline. He accused the committee's leadership of intentionally covering up evidence. He laid out the timeline with surgical precision, the years of online pressure, the selective release, the sudden silence, and then he pointed directly at the people who reversed their stance the moment the truth got too close. Then he listed the most damning detail of all. The committee hadn't requested a single one of the documents that actually mattered. Not the victim statements. Not the investigative records. Not the witness interviews. Not the recordings. Not the material used to open the case. Nothing. The committee that claimed to be fighting for the truth refused to ask for the truth. And that's when Goldman delivered the line that sent shockwaves through Congress, the line that transformed a hearing into a moment of political history. He said the committee chair wasn't just failing. He wasn't just being selective. He was being used. He was acting as a useful idiot, shielding someone who didn't want the truth to come out. That line wasn't an insult. It was an accusation of motive. It was a statement that the investigation wasn't about facts. It was about control. Control over what gets released. Control over which details are emphasized. Control over what the public is allowed to know. And control over the narrative that had been used for years to fire up political audiences. Goldman went even further. He exposed the blueprint behind the entire scandal. The cycle of conspiracy politics that starts with a story, grows through repetition, and then collapses the moment real evidence appears. The same cycle used to push certain theories for years. The same cycle that kept audiences angry, emotional, and engaged. The same cycle that treats rumors like truth, and treats truth like danger. Because once the investigators actually examined the files, once they dug past the rumors and into the documents themselves, the story didn't match what had been promised. And suddenly the entire circus went silent. This wasn't about exposing wrongdoing. It wasn't about accountability. It wasn't about justice. It was about weaponizing a narrative so effectively that millions believed it, and then quietly burying the truth when it pointed in the wrong direction. In Goldman's words, the moment the facts contradicted the story, the people pushing the narrative weren't just wrong, they were exposed. Their credibility, he said, would crumble because if one conspiracy theory collapses under pressure, the rest collapse with it. And that's why this moment matters so much. Because it reveals exactly how misinformation survives. By being loud when the story is convenient and silent when it isn't. This story isn't just about the files. It's about how storytelling is used as a political weapon, how outrage becomes a tool, how half-truths become headlines, how theories become movements, and how quickly a movement will bury its own message when the facts threaten the storyline. This moment showed exactly how far certain people will go to maintain control, even if it means refusing evidence, blocking documents, shutting down investigations, and accusing others of doing exactly what they themselves are doing. Oversight only works when people want the truth. When the people running the investigation refuse to request the evidence, the investigation isn't broken, it's rigged. And that's the reality this hearing ripped open. The public deserves to know why the sudden silence hit at the exact moment the real review was done. They deserve to know why the loudest voices shut down their own demands. They deserve to know why people who promise transparency are now blocking it. They deserve to know why the files, once framed as the ultimate political weapon, are now treated like radioactive material no one wants to touch. And they deserve to know how this moment fits into the larger picture. A picture showing how easily narratives can be built, manipulated, and weaponized when no one is checking the facts. This isn't just a political scandal. It's a roadmap. A roadmap showing how power protects itself, how misinformation gets recycled, how public anger becomes a commodity, and how silence becomes the final confirmation that the truth isn't convenient. Because when the shouting stops, when the loudest voices go quiet, that's when you know the truth is getting close. If you want more deep dive breakdowns that cut through spin, expose what's really happening behind the scenes, and bring you the full story without filters or distractions, make sure to hit subscribe, tap the like button, and turn on notifications so you never miss a video. Your support helps us keep going, keep digging, and keep bringing the truth into the light.